Hey, it's been a long day for me, and I'm going to end this long day talking about Annabelle. Annabelle is the spin-off of The Conjuring, which came out last year, directed by James Wan, film that I liked a lot. In my list for favorite films of 2014, it was number 2. It was also my favorite horror film of last year. Really, just a really fun film. It had a lot of good homage to classic horror films, as well as being its own entity. James Wan showed that he hasn't lost his touch in directing horror and being stylistic and clever and unique. Really good film, The Conjuring. Liked it a lot. So this was the follow-up to that, Annabelle. And Annabelle is actually a prequel. It doesn't follow any of the main characters from The Conjuring, but a plot device from The Conjuring, which was this really creepy-looking doll that's like a couple feet high, and it's possessed. And so this movie, Annabelle, is about that doll. It's the story behind it. I didn't come into this expecting that much as I like The Conjuring. If James Wan was directing this, I would have been way more optimistic, but instead he was just a producer. Instead, the director of this film did the cinematography for The Conjuring. And when I looked up the guy, he's done cinematography for a lot of movies, actually, including Insidious, another James Wan film that I like. And so I thought, this guy, he's good he's good at cinematography, he's good at camera work. How good is he as a director, though? Well, from what I read, he's only directed a couple other films, and one of them is Mortal Kombat Annihilation, which, if you haven't seen, is not very good. And anybody that's seen the movie can tell you that. So that got me on the fence pretty heavily. Plus, it's a prequel, prequels in general aren't very good usually. It's just been 1 year after The Conjuring, not very much time to, plan out a follow-up film. Just a lot of things that I kind of tallied together and thought, I can't imagine this spin-off being very good. And so I kind of guessed, I was like, I doubt this will be terrible, though. I'm going to guess it's probably going to get somewhere between the 30s to 40s on Rotten Tomatoes. And I actually wasn't too far off. I think it's at like around a 30% right now. So I went with some friends to go check it out. And, it's just, it's okay. That's really what it is. It has the problems that I thought it was going to have. There was nothing about it that really took me by surprise as far as what was wrong with the film. It was pretty much what I was expecting. And at the same time, there are nice features about the film that are similar to The Conjuring, and some a little bit different. And those nice features of the film are nice enough to the point where it's not a terrible film. It's just kind of okay. It's kind of somewhere in between. I'd say it's kind of worth a rental, give or take. Definitely not worth theater price. Although, if you want to see this movie, you're probably going to go see it anyways. This movie is, I'm guessing this movie's going to do really well at the box office. The theater we went to was pretty packed. So let's break into this. So I figured this wasn't going to be as good, and it wasn't. And one of the things I figured it wasn't going to get right is the subtlety that The Conjuring had. I've preached it a million times. I'll preach it again. It's always scarier and far more effective if your movie scares are mostly based on subtlety, quiet atmospheric build-up, and occasionally a well-placed jump scare. But mostly in the characters and atmosphere and story. Not just jump scare after jump scare after jump scare. And this movie, of course, it was jump scare after jump scare after jump scare. Almost every single one being very predictable. I've always thought, You know a movie is desperate to make you jump when a transition from one scene to another is a jump scare, and this movie had that. At one point, when it jumps to another scene, the transition is lightning, and it's like it's boom. It's done to make you jump, and just that is just so weak. Such a pathetic way to try to get the audience to jump is thunder, first of all, but also just through a transition to another scene. But I mean, that's the thing. There's not that much subtlety to this movie, and the scariest parts of the movie is when it is like The Conjuring, in the sense that it's subtle. There are some moments that, again, there are some nice things about this movie, and one of them is the few times when it is being subtle, because there are scary moments where something's happening, something supernatural's happening, and there's no music, and if there is music, then it's very quiet music, and there's not loud noises, it's just quiet. There's something in the background that's moving, maybe a ghost is walking by, something very just subtle and normal, and not normal, it's something that's just subtle, and it just happens, and they try not to, overblow it. Those moments are way more effective. And actually, my friend was telling me after the movie, he said, for him, the part that got him the most, because he didn't think it was that good of a movie either, but he did admit he thought one part that was scary is when you see an actual demon in this film at one point at the bottom of the stairs, and it's really dark, so you can't see him, you can just see his shadow. And if I recall correctly, there's no music playing at that part. Granted, it does end with a jump scene, if I recall, but at first it is just like seeing him like kind of crouched like on the stairs, and you know what it is, but you can't get quite a good shot at it. That's a good example of how, for him, the scariest moment of the movie, my friend, was something that wasn't just in your face. Loud music, And the scares is really the biggest problem with this movie. There's a lot of, the nicest things I can say about this movie are actually a lot of the essential parts of the movie. The biggest problem with this movie is that the scares don't work. The characters are likable. The acting, for the most part, is good. It's well shot for the most part. I mean, you got a guy who's done cinematography for a very long time behind it, and he did cinematography for The Conjuring, so I would hope that would work. All but one scene I didn't think was well shot, but I'll get to that later. It's, for the most part, well shot, good special effects. There's a lot of, and actually, you know what? The story. I actually like the story to this movie. I like the story, and I like the arc of the characters. There's actually, so when you hear me say all that, you're like, well, then what about this movie isn't good? Well, it's a horror movie, but it fails to be a horror movie. That's what's kind of weird about this movie, is that it succeeds in doing a lot of the things that it should do as a movie, except it fails at living up to its genre. Because the scares in this movie, most of them, don't work. Because they're generic and predictable. And half the time it's a cheap, forgettable, annoying jump scare. Who likes that anymore? Really? And it's just, there's just not enough good scares to outweigh the bad ones, I talked about in my review from Deliver Us from Evil that movie had a lot of issues, and there were a lot of problems with it. And that movie suffered from having way too many jump scares. But there were still enough good qualities of that film, and enough creepy atmosphere of that film, to the point where I was able to give it a slight recommendation. And this is almost on that same level, but I would say it goes a step lower because it's a follow-up to a really good horror film, The Conjuring. So, I'm going to look at my notes real quick. So, okay, so just a couple examples of some scares that didn't work very well. One thing I'd like to say, here's one thing that could have been really good but didn't have that much payoff. At the beginning of the film, I'll briefly explain the plot. This newlywed couple. They're expecting their firstborn child, their first child, and the husband buys his wife this really creepy doll, and it's the doll from The Conjuring, and the daughter of their neighbor joined a Charles Manson-like cult, and she and her psycho boyfriend from the cult break into her parents' house, kill them, and then they end up going over to the house of our main characters, attack them, boyfriend gets killed, psycho cult daughter ends up, she kills herself, but before doing so, does some sort of ritual to put herself into the doll. So she possesses the doll and dies. And so they don't know any of this. They don't know that the doll's possessed. And so recovering from this very traumatic incident and having their first child, this doll starts effing up their lives. There's one point in the movie after all that where the mom, and her name is Mia, and I'll get back to that in a second. Mia is holding her baby, and the doll has been placed on a rocking chair, and the rocking chair, of course, squeaks when it rocks back and forth. There's one scene in particular where Mia's alone in the house with her baby, and they're just doing whatever. I think she's sewing or something like that, and then you hear the rocking chair that the doll's on start to rock. You hear it rocking, and you kind of think like, ooh, oh, the ghost is playing with Mia. And then it cuts to the doll on the chair, rocking. This is an example of one of the problems with how the doll is used in this movie. I think it would have been a lot better if they didn't cram it in our face so much that the doll is possessed. Because we know this already. Even if you haven't seen The Conjuring, which if you have seen The Conjuring, then you already know all this. But even if you haven't, you know from the opening scene that this doll is possessed because they tell you. So there's no need, every time something creepy happens, every time something paranormal happens, every time a ghost is seen, you don't need to cut back to the doll and zoom in on the doll's creepy face. We know that it's coming from the possessed doll. It would be much creepier, if the doll is just in the background half the time. Going back to the rocking chair scene, what if Mia, the mom, is with her baby, and you hear the rocking chair, but it doesn't show it. You just keep hearing it in the background. We, the audience, know what's going on, but the main character doesn't know yet that the doll's possessed. So to not see the doll on the rocking chair, but know the doll's on the rocking chair, and to hear that and to not cut to it, I'm not saying it would be really scary, but the subtlety of it would have a much better effect, I think. And that's just one example of many times where something creepy happens, and then we have to cut right to the doll and zoom in on the doll's creepy face. We know. You don't have to show us that. You don't have to zoom in and play creepy music every time the doll's around. Let the doll just kind of be in the background. It's creepier that way. It's more effective because we know if a doll is in the background during a creepy scene, we see the doll, we know that the doll is the cause of all this, but the main characters are still oblivious, and it would just be more effective. And again, this is just one example. But, and again, as far as another one with the scares that don't work, just so many jump scares, and none of them work, for the most part. And one thing I want to, before I forget to point this out, maybe I'm overthinking this. this movie, I think, is paying a huge homage to Rosemary's Baby, which wouldn't be too surprising if that was the point. The Conjuring paid homage to several classic horror films, which is great. I feel like this movie, there's a big setting in this film that I feel is paying homage to Rosemary's Baby, because at the beginning of the movie, the main couple that we're watching in this film live in a house. And then the ghost ends up setting the house on fire with overcooked popcorn. Yeah. And so they leave the house and they move into an apartment. First of all, the apartment looks a lot like the apartment from Rosemary's Baby, the original. And also, this movie takes place in the 70s. So the timeline isn't terribly far off from the original Rosemary's Baby movie. And not to mention, both movies have a satanic cult involved. Granted, the satanic cult in this movie, Annabelle, they don't live in the apartment. They're just a crazy Charles Manson-like cult that appear briefly in the beginning of the movie. But there's a cult involved. There's a baby involved in both movies. In Annabelle, the baby doesn't get possessed, or the baby's not the Antichrist or anything like that. But just saying, there's a baby involved. And here's the biggest clue of them all. The main character's name in Annabelle is Mia. Mia was the first name of the actress that played Rosemary in the original Rosemary's Baby. And also, she's blonde. Mia, I can't remember her last name, but the actress from Rosemary's Baby, she was blonde, and this character in Annabelle's blonde too, with short hair, short blonde hair. I just saw all these similarities, and I just couldn't help but think, like, is this kind of paying homage to Rosemary's Baby? If it is, that's kind of neat. It's kind of cool. It's just kind of random at the same time, but it kind of makes sense because The Conjuring paid homage to classic horror films as well. But yeah, I don't know if anyone has pointed that out yet, but on the internet. But I just thought I would go ahead and give my 2 cents on that. But real quick, I want to go back real quick to the beginning of the film when the cult attacks the main characters. I actually kind of liked this. The movie doesn't waste much time getting into the horror aspect of the film, unlike The Conjuring, which took its time, which you could say is a bad thing. But I like how in the beginning of the movie, there's a scene where the main character, the couple, they're watching TV, and you see a news piece on the Manson family, and they talk about how lately there's been all these runaway teenagers joining these crazy cults, and then it turns out that actually becomes a little plot point of the film. I actually kind of like that. It was interesting to see them bring something that was going on at that time, and that was scary for sure, up in this film. And I like how they were able to make that relate to the supernatural / religious and demonic part of the film. I actually thought that was pretty well done. Again, I think it's actually a pretty well written film. And to go on, this is going on with the one scene I didn't think was shot well. When the 2 psychos from the cult are attacking the main characters, the husband gets into a fight with the 2, mostly the guy, and this is the one scene of the film that was not filmed well. The build up to the scene was filmed well, but when the 2 guys are on the floor wrestling, and they have like a knife, one of them has a knife, it's really shaky. Lots of shaky cam. And I had kind of a hard time telling what was going on. And it was odd that it was done so poorly like that, considering the rest of the film was for the most part shot very well, very beautifully actually. But I just wanted to point that out. So, what else do I have to talk about? I mean, like I said, the biggest problem with this movie is just the scares don't work. And I feel like this movie, and you can tell, and this is one of the reasons why the movie shouldn't have come out so quickly, just a year after The Conjuring, you can tell this movie was rushed. You could tell, well, Conjuring was a huge success. We got to get this movie out by next fall. Hurry, hurry, let's get this made. You can tell because the scares feel so, again, just so forced. And it's like they're just taking, the best scares are the subtle scares, but they're also throwing in all these cheap, throwaway jump scares. It's like they're just taking all this crap, throwing it to the wall, and seeing what sticks. And that's what ruins the movie. Because it distracts you. The poor attempt to scare you distracts you from the beautifully shot, mostly well written, and mostly well acted movie. And it brings it down to the point where I just can't say it's a good movie. It's not terrible. It's just not very good. One other thing that I didn't like is that you actually, and I pointed this out earlier, you actually see the demon in this movie. The demon that's, or at least a demon that's haunting the main characters. I didn't like that. Not because it scared me. It didn't. I would have been okay if maybe it showed just a tiny bit of it for like a second. But you see it quite a few times in the film. I did not like this because The Conjuring did it better because for the most part, you just see ghosts or people that, or just like, you see ghosts in The Conjuring, reanimated people like that. When the climax of The Conjuring is an exorcism, and you don't see, if I recall correctly, you don't see the demon in that movie that possesses the mother that needs to be that needs to be saved. In this movie, there's no exorcism in Annabelle, which I think was a good move. But you see the demon in the flesh, and I don't know. I liked it a lot better when there was more mystery behind not seeing it. The fact that they actually showed this like black demon holding up this 3-foot doll, I didn't think it worked very well. I just didn't. Excuse me. One of the nice things I can say about this movie is that although it's a follow-up to The Conjuring, and you can tell it's not doing the same thing that The Conjuring did. It's actually doing a lot of different things, which, again, I liked that. But as far as that goes, that was one change that I didn't like. But yeah, I could go on and on and on more about it, and I've already talked way more about it than I probably should have. But all in all, if you liked The Conjuring, I'd say rent this. Get it as a Redbox rental. Maybe if it goes on Netflix, for sure. I don't recommend seeing it in the theaters. And if you do, definitely go to a cheaper showing. It's definitely not worth full ticket price. I give it a C-, because there's still some good things about it. If you haven't seen The Conjuring, definitely see that. I really can't stress enough to see that. And if by chance you saw Annabelle but didn't see The Conjuring, and you're not sure if you want to see The Conjuring based on Annabelle, forget that and go see The Conjuring. But, I know that they want to make more installments to this franchise. I'm all for that, but get James Wan to direct it, or at least get a more experienced director behind it. Again, no offense to the director of Annabelle, but the guy has done more cinematography than he has directing, and his directing credit is not very good. His cinematography work is, but his directing not so much. It's just not his skill, frankly. Not to be mean, it's just not his skill. He should stick to cinematography, and we should get a guy who's more hands-on with directing. And because again, the biggest problem with this movie is the direction of the scares. So yeah, now I'm just repeating myself. So that's my review of Annabelle. I'll have some more movies up next week, and thanks for watching.